Welcome to the Small Data Forum podcast, the occasional series where we talk to thought leaders and industry experts about the impact of data, big and small, in this case, particularly in the world of brand communication. I'm joined at the beginning of 2022 by Christian Polman. Christian is currently the UK MD of Looping Group. Christian, you can tell us a little bit about that. Just before I get you to introduce yourself, just to let our listeners and indeed our viewers know, Christian has a history of working in digital marketing. He's the proud possessor of an MBA. He's worked at consultancy Bain, trained at Bain, at Digitas, Google, and has spent some time with the marketing analytics business Ubiquity. But Christian, if you could just tell us a little bit about, beyond that, about what you're doing day to day now as running the UK operation of Looping Group.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here. Big fan of Small Data Forum, so it's particularly fun to be hosted on it.
Excellent.
And engage in the great conversations that you promote. Looping Group is effectively a data-driven storytelling business. We bring together the disciplines that we think are of growing importance to brands, which is centered around data and insights as a baseline for being able to build great publishing models for brands and being able to innovate in the publishing space through our own media brands as well. So effectively, we operate in those three different territories and bring them together to drive new thinking, drive innovation, and drive the way that brands respond to and adapt to what we call the editorial society, where consumers are increasingly in control. We've known that for a long time, but it is obviously growing in importance, especially as media becomes more expensive and brands need to rethink how they reach consumers, how they build their brands, how they engage with consumers, how they build communities, how they position their brands in the digital space. A whole host of themes that everyone's familiar with, but are becoming more and more important as we move forward. And I think, as we'll discuss a little bit later, those are going to become even more important as we enter the next chapter of the internet. We'll talk about the Metaverse, I'm sure, since that's the topic du jour. But we believe going forward that there's a growing need to be thinking about these things as brands, as marketers, as businesses. Does that cover it?
I think that's a very well. I mean, listen. It's your business, but I think that covers it very well indeed. As a fan of the Small Data Forum podcast, you'll know that we look at uses and abuses. I'm particularly interested in how you help brands to navigate and make sense of this world, because there are downsides as well as upsides. So you help brands make sense of the opportunities the digital marketing offers. Where would you say that the smart money is going in the months and years ahead?
Yeah, well, I think it's first thing to say, as you noted, in my previous life, I was in a environment that was focused on marketing optimization, which I think is an area that's very important. And the topic of effectiveness has continued to grow as there's more research showing that brands have not done that properly and have not necessarily, in all cases, or should I say, there's still lots of room to drive effectiveness. So I think there's at a starting point, I think that is a place where a lot of brands will continue to look because the results are there. But on the other hand, I think it's very easy to say brands are shifting spend around certain channels where I think smart marketers are thinking beyond pure optimization across your different media channels and thinking more holistically around how should their customer experience evolve as the world changes and as media changes. Is their brand future-proofed? Have they invested in the right assets for the brand, in the right structure for the brand? And even on a more sort of existential level, does their brand even have a purpose? We know that's been a big topic of conversation, but it's becoming very clear that this is mattering more as we enter a more digitally first media ecosystem and consumer landscape. How are brands resonating with consumers in that space? Having the research, having the insights is becoming more important. I think research is seeing a renaissance of sorts which is very welcome, because I think for a long time there was this steady march towards just shifting spend towards digital channels and shifting media budgets, but not necessarily thinking critically about the bigger picture, which is, I guess, my point here. And the last one I want to mention is around creativity and content off the back of that. So brands are realizing that creativity is such a significant driver of ROI that they need to be really sure about whether their creative is delivering the right message, is resonating with consumers, and is attracting attention, because you have to win attention in the current media environment. Off the back of that, content is becoming more important, because as the media ecosystem fragments, you have more channels, you have different places where you can reach consumers, and creativity and content go hand in hand in the sense that if it is done in a way that is respectful of what consumers are looking for and how those channels work. The fundamentals of TikTok, for example, are very different than the fundamentals of Instagram or Facebook or any other digital channel, or certainly any offline channel, which is still a conversation that a lot of brands are waking up to, which is that you can't just take TV ads and throw them into your digital channels, or your social channels at least. So I think that that level of the smart marketers are thinking about that direction of travel and thinking holistically about how all those things need to be coming together to produce the right outcomes.
Very good. Now, he's a friend of yours, and as a friend of mine, you know Ian Whitaker, Liberty Sky Advisors, very smart, CTA, and indeed a previous guest on the Small Data Forum podcast, kind of one-to-ones. He said, as I'm sure you'll have seen, I know you're an aficionado and quite a heavy user of LinkedIn. You'll have seen that he was saying yesterday, he was commenting on Apple's share price going up and up and up, in response to the potential the company has for creating metaverse-friendly, not small m metaverse-friendly products in the future. I wanted to know, not focusing on Zuckerberg and Facebook's conceptualization of the metaverse. Metaverse is something beyond the company Meta. Are you beginning to see any traction, any of the companies and brands that you work with or are pitching to saying, what's our metaverse strategy? Or is it too early for that?
No, we are. We're working on a metaverse project at the moment, and it is all about making sense of what that environment looks like in the future and how brands need to respond to that, or not even just respond to that, how their brand can live in that environment in the future. So I think metaverse is not just it's very easy to have this, take a utopian or a Luddite view and stick to that. But I think the trick is really finding the space in between where things are really heading and trying to make sense of that, because the truth is always somewhere in between with these things. We're not going to all be living in the metaverse tomorrow. No one's claiming that, but even in 5 or 10 years, I think the adoption will still be picking up. This is the very early days of this whole dialogue around what the metaverse looks like. And actually, I think the interesting debate is not so much around what the metaverse looks like, but how that ecosystem comes together. And there's a discussion around Web3, which is a line of argumentation that this is a chance for us to learn from our mistakes from Web 2, where we let very few and very large technology-oriented companies own and control how that ecosystem works and how it's monetized. And Web 3 suggests that there's a potential to build an alternative along with the growth of the metaverse that is more open, that's more inclusive, and that's more equitable. And I think brands need to take a real interest in that, because as successful as Web 2 has been in terms of giving brands access to consumers, it has also put an enormous amount of control in the hands of a few companies that they rely on to reach those consumers. And I think no one would argue that competition is good. What we don't think is good for brands is a situation where three companies account for more than half of all advertising spend, which is what WARC has predicted by 2025 will be in that situation. With the metaverse, we could envision a future where there's more opportunity to work with creators directly, for example, where we can tap into a whole new marketplace and where brands can engage directly with consumers as well in a way that they can't do today. I think it's going to open up on a more fundamental level an entirely new era of creativity. Creativity and creators in particular are the ones that are exploiting the metaverse first. And that's very obvious in the art market, which is embracing the metaverse first and before almost any other market. The fashion market, Nike has been one of the most active in the metaverse, even buying a design company that designs virtual sneakers. They've gone out, bought this firm and invested in that. They have built up Nike Land and Roblox. The range of activities and how they're thinking about that demonstrates that they are putting a strong strategic focus on it. And if Nike's doing that, I think a lot of brands who are not doing it should probably be paying attention and thinking about how do they shift to the metaverse and what should their position be with regards to how that can evolve in the interest of brands. And then obviously on a more fundamental level, where can they fit in terms of connecting with consumers and using that technology to drive outcomes. I think it's also one last point on the metaverse. I think it's also easy to say, well, this is just a marketing opportunity or a place where brands are going to live. It's absolutely not. It's a fundamental business question that extends well beyond marketing and brands. And I think as we progress, companies will realize they need to be looking at metaverses in quite a holistic way when it comes to how their whole business model can evolve and adapt. Because it includes virtual currencies as much as it includes virtual goods, virtual real estate, virtual fashion. We're starting to see all these different pieces coming together to create quite an interesting place where companies can live and interact with consumers.
Well, as you described, as a fan of this podcast, you'll know that I described the launch of Meta, at least the new parent company, as being like a cheap conjurer's trick to say, look over here, aren't we doing interesting things? Whilst hate and self-harm and the rest of it appears still across Meta's properties. And indeed, I've been in recent weeks, I've been revisiting quite a lot of of Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And there's a huge
favorite.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of. It's almost like there's a playbook for big tech that Booker's been putting out for years and years and years. Particularly even that first episode with the two old women who are both dying. If you're familiar with that one. Anyway, I'm interested in safety. Actually, the reason that I thought of Black Mirror was because about safety and brand safety. In your experience, how concerned are brands really about brand safety? Is it an issue that they're taking seriously? Or is it something that they're just kind of holding their nose and getting on with selling their wares via social and digital platforms?
Yeah, and this is one we've been debating for a while, and I think it's a very interesting question because brand safety has largely kind of two domains that, as far as what marketers and brand owners are thinking about. One of those is the creativity, the content, the messaging that they're producing. And are those brands safe? In other words, are the messages that they're putting out appropriate? And, we saw in the last few days a problem with a blog that OVO sent out suggesting suggesting activities that people could do to keep warm, which was obviously not particularly sensitive to a lot of people who actually are living in that situation. And that's a brand safety issue. Then there's another whole domain, which is, and by the way, I can see how that happens because it's very easy for a group of people not to necessarily, especially in our industry where we know that there's a bit of a problem with diversity and in multiple ways, but in particular around socioeconomic backgrounds where there's a bias towards sort of middle-class thinking because of the types of people that are in marketing. It's not a unique problem to marketing, it's a problem across business, but in marketing it's particularly important because you have to understand consumers and consumer insights. And so we've been focusing on that a lot at Looping Group in our hiring, because luckily we've been able to start from scratch and think about how do we build a more diverse team in that sense. Then on the other hand, so I think that's kind of core to the problem. That's not unique to them. It's a problem across the industry is what I'm saying. And then on the other hand, there's brand safety in media. So if we take these two things separately sorry, one last thing on the media side is what I mean there, for those who are probably less familiar with it, is where does advertising appear and what does it appear alongside and in what context? On what sites, in what environments, in the context of what dialogue, for example. Mm-hmm. So, and what is it funding as a result of that? Because advertising is funding some content. That's the space that advertising lives in, and that's where some of the biggest controversies in advertising have been related to what advertising is funding. You know, we've seen some famous examples around terrorist content about 5-6 years ago, and other things along those lines. So in the first one, it's very important. I think brands are really conscious, especially in light of Black Lives Matters and Me Too and other movements where, and that has grown into lots of different areas and is a very healthy debate that we're having as a society in terms of how do we be more inclusive across, all kinds of messaging. And I do have to say that it's in some ways amazing to see how I think advertising as an industry has responded to that and brands have responded to that. And I think by some measures, advertising is now leading that conversation and leading that shift. And tends to be tends to respond quickly. The lead time for advertising is very short, for example. And also brands need, realize and recognize that they need to be careful about how they're connecting with consumers, or they're at risk of becoming irrelevant. So there's a pressure on brands to evolve and adapt quickly there. And we've set up a brand protection unit at Looping that specifically provides a service around that. That's how invested we are in brand safety and how much demand there is that we're seeing from clients. On the other hand is brand safety in media. And I think as Sam, you and I have debated in the past, especially during my time at Ubiquity, where I was thinking about media quite a lot, I don't think brands have taken that very seriously. And that's why we continue to see brands funding long tail advertising, which is inherently brand unsafe. Mm-hmm. Could be funding all kinds of content that is not something that most brands should be proud of funding. Certainly not. There's a lot of brands that shouldn't be there who where their brand values contrast with the sites that they're actually putting their money behind. And there has been some investment in that space, and I think there are some brands that have done well. I don't want to be too dismissive. But on the other hand, long tail advertising continues to attract investment because there's this prevailing narrative that targeted advertising delivers results, when the reality is we know that from research that premium contexts, premium placements are actually better at driving results. I mean, that's a very broad statement, but it's generally true. So there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of what brands are actually funding in the advertising space. You brought up the example of Lush, who turned the tap off on all their social media, which I think they kept things running on Twitter and TikTok, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's really interesting, because in that example, they decided that it didn't align with their brand values for a number of reasons. And a lot of what Lush is bringing to people's lives is a sense of relaxation. I think literally the bath bomb, or whatever they call it, is designed to make you feel really relaxed in your bath. I mean, the sense that they've put into those and the experience that you have when you're in a warm bath relaxing, they feel contradicts the stress that people get from living in a digital world where people are shouting at each other and where the wrong kinds of content's being promoted by the algorithms. And that's really, I think, as a brand, connecting those things with their decision makes a lot of sense. For other brands, it doesn't there isn't necessarily that contradiction. And I don't think that prevents them from being able to live in those digital environments in a way that is ethically sound. They're not necessarily responsible for policing those environments. They can call for it. But if there isn't a clear contradiction with their brand values, then who is anyone else to judge whether they're in those environments or not? It's not their media properties. So I think that's a really good framework for brands to be thinking about the second half, which is in what environments do they live and where do they put their media budgets?
Very good, very good. You've both covered and preempted a couple of further questions. So I guess my final question for you would be, and I think the Lush example is a good one. I think it's interesting to see what's happened over Stop Funding Hate. It's interesting to see what's happened over Facebook boycott. I think both of those have been candidly, they haven't done anything to stop Daily Mail Group or Meta's or Alphabet's profit surges in recent times. But I think that Lush example is a good one. But I like the way that you've navigated through there. It's about the brand values. It's about taking the content that they're going to be creating and the creativity they're going to be applying, and actually finding that this environment of doom scrolling and not being able to switch off is not resonant with their brand values. So I think that's a very important, nice distinction. I guess my final sort of Uber question would be, what is your advice for brands on how they navigate both the upsides and the downsides of digital and social media platforms, looking to kind of grow and sustain themselves in this increasingly digital ecosystem?
Yeah, well, on a basic level, of course, it's once you've sorted out your brand values and how your brand can live in those environments, because I think that is the starting point, really, is asking some really hard questions about what your brand stands for, what's its purpose. I don't need to go through all of that because it's been very heavily debated. And I think at this point, if people aren't on board, then they're not engaging enough in the literature, the marketing literature that's out there, because the benefits of thinking that through are important. I think on a more basic level, though, it's becoming more critical as we have shifted more time to more consumer time and attention into the digital environments. And then linking back to the metaverse question, it's going to become really important to have a very solid understanding of your brand. And in particular, what conversations can your brand participate in? We know that younger consumers are really interested in doing good for the world. There's very, very good research showing that Gen Z in particular is engaging with brands in a completely different way than older generations. But I think across the board, there's been a clear shift towards thinking about how individual values align with the brands that they're engaging with. And in the metaverse, this is going to become even more important, because that will be a space where people will be able to bring brands into their own identity, if that makes sense. They will be wearing certain sneakers in the metaverse. They will be buying, property in certain areas and next to certain celebrities, et cetera, going into certain shops. And also because brands will be selling goods that are virtual only, what those brands stand for will matter even more. And one of my things I've been thinking about lately is, what's the best way for brands to sort of protect themselves and and buy some time as they try to make this shift into, an even more digital first world and a completely different digital world potentially. And I think one of those is actually investing very heavily in your brand now. So we've talked about your brand values, what you stand for, et cetera, but then also investing in your brand in terms of building that up with consumers. Leverage the tools that we have available today that we know work It's very tempting to just run away from TV and start thinking entirely about, just your digital marketing. But that TV, as we've seen time and time again, still plays a vital role for a lot of brands in terms of long-term brand building. And those effects are going to last for multiple years. So I don't think there's necessarily a need to go running away from TV anytime soon, although the economics of that are getting more challenging. As I've worked on some studies in the past, Sam, you're familiar with those, where we demonstrated that TV will be hitting a tipping point quite soon, where it's very, very difficult to demonstrate the ROI. Reaching younger consumers is also absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical to think about digital spaces and digital platforms, because they're just not watching TV anymore. So that's already one consumer group that we know has shifted. So upside is there, especially in certain pockets, especially younger consumers, as I mentioned, especially in terms of the targeting capabilities, reaching high net worth individuals, as an example, target group that's notoriously difficult to reach. If you can find ways of getting to them online in creative ways, I think that's one. The other one is brands need to think more holistically around who they're working with, who they're engaging with, and influencers. It's very easy to talk about influencers becoming, attracting more and more spend. The reason for that is because it is a very easy way to reach new audiences quite cost effectively. They have their own followings, they have their own audience. If you are smart about that and you do it in a way that, again, is aligned with your brand and authentic to what you stand for as a brand, that's a very attractive route for a lot of brands to grow, to grow into new audiences and to reach new audiences. We've seen it work very well. We helped launch a TikTok channel for BMW, and we were actually very surprised at how quickly we were able to build an audience of younger consumers that we were, not necessarily reaching as in as focused a way in the past. Within 4 months, there's about 650,000 plus followers on that channel, and everyone's been quite surprised by the engagement numbers and how quickly that's built up. So on the other hand, it's just another channel, and it's not something that I think. That doesn't suggest that marketers just need to go running off and embracing those sorts of things, but thinking about it in the mix of the broader mix is what's important. Downsides, I think this, we've kind of covered that already. It comes back to the brand safety point to some extent. As everything gets more complex, as your brand has to navigate these new environments, you have to be even more clear about how you're engaging with consumers, because that dialogue with consumers has sort of accelerated and magnified and grown. And it's very easy for those things to slip into the wrong places or the wrong environments or the wrong direction. So that is something that I think we would prioritize as an investment for brands, is thinking really carefully about setting that up, defining the processes. And that's why we've combined a kind of consultancy unit, an insight unit, into our model and how we work with brands, and then being able to deliver that to brands on a global scale.
Very good. Well, I think it's fantastic. I think having the time, having the opportunity to talk to active practitioners, but I mean, in your case, a practitioner leading a growing and a thriving practice, but also that has that strategic kind of heart or guts guiding it. I think maybe some of the problems that we've got into, or the brands have got into, is not having advisors who are able to take that kind of view and that strategic approach. So, Christian, thank you so much for your time. It'll be a delight and a shock for you to have a new podcast in the Small Data Forum podcast series drop into your podcast app that features you yourself rather than just me and Neville and Thomas. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for your support, and we'll speak again soon, I have no doubt.
Thanks, Sam. Much appreciated.
Cheers.
See ya.